There's something out there, moving through our solar system, and it shouldn't be here, not in the way it arrived, not in the way it moves, not in the direction it's heading. Scientists tried to explain it away, called it a comet, said it would pass by harmlessly and vanish forever into the infinite dark. But then the numbers started coming in, and those numbers changed everything. What if I told you that the object everyone assumed was leaving our solar system forever might actually be preparing to come back? Not in some distant future beyond our lifetimes, but soon, within months, within this year. Before we go on, write your city below so I can see which part of this tiny blue planet and silent cosmos beyond is listening tonight. Right now, at this very moment, an interstellar visitor designated 3I Atlas is hurtling through the constellation Cancer, moving at velocities that defy everything we thought we understood about cosmic wanderers. And in just weeks, it will reach Jupiter, the king of planets, the gravitational giant that has shaped the architecture of our solar system for billions of years. And when it arrives there, when it crosses that precise boundary in space where Jupiter's gravity becomes dominant over the sun's pull, something extraordinary might happen. Something that NASA officially says is impossible. Something that the mathematics whisper could be inevitable. This is the story of an object that appeared from the direction of the galactic center, that aligned itself with our planetary plane to within 5 degrees, a probability so low it strains coincidence. That timed its arrival to pass within touching distance of Mars, Venus, and Jupiter. That exhibits chemical signatures never seen before. That fires jets of material toward the sun when every law of physics says those jets should point away. This is the story of what might be watching us, what might be returning, what might have always been here. Stay with me. Because by the time you've heard what I'm about to tell you, the night sky will never look the same again. 2 days from now, on January 22nd, something rare will occur. Earth will position itself almost directly between the Sun and 3I Atlas. The alignment will be so precise that the angle between them shrinks to less than 1 degree. And for nearly a full week, that geometric configuration will hold. Astronomers call this opposition. It's a viewing angle we've never had for any previous interstellar object. Not for Oumuamua, the mysterious tumbling visitor that violated physics with its unexplained acceleration. Not for Borisov, the well-behaved comet that came and went without controversy. Only 3I Atlas. During opposition, something remarkable happens with light. When the sun sits directly behind Earth, shadows disappear. Surface features become visible that would otherwise hide in darkness. Materials that might normally scatter light sideways instead bounce it straight back, creating what astronomers call an opposition surge, a sudden brightening that reveals the true nature of what you're looking at. For 3I Atlas, this moment offers an unprecedented opportunity, a chance to see through the veil of dust and gas surrounding this visitor, to understand what it's made of, to determine if the anomalies we've detected are real or illusion. But here's what troubles certain researchers late at night. Here's what they won't say publicly but discuss in hushed conversations behind closed doors. If 3I Atlas is intelligently controlled, if it's decelerating through some form of propulsion we don't yet understand, opposition would be the worst possible time to reveal itself. Any exhaust plume, any energy emission, any artificial activity would be maximally visible during these days, silhouetted against the cosmic background without shadows to hide it. A sophisticated probe from another civilization would know this, would anticipate this geometry, would go silent precisely when we're watching most carefully. Unless it wanted to be seen, Dr. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astrophysicist who first dared suggest that Oumuamua might have been artificial, has been characteristically direct about this moment. He's published analysis calling for intensive observation during opposition. He's noted that this opportunity may not repeat for decades. That if we're going to understand what 3I Atlas truly is, the answer might reveal itself in the next 7 days. The telescopes are ready. Hubble has already captured images showing that persistent sunward jet, that impossible tail that streams toward our star when everything we know about comets says it should point away. The James Webb Space Telescope has detected carbon dioxide, water vapor, carbon monoxide in the coma, all consistent with a natural comet, all consistent with excellent camouflage. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that mainstream astronomy refuses to acknowledge. If you wanted to disguise a spacecraft as a natural object, you would coat it in ice. You would let that ice sublimate under solar heating, creating a coma and tail indistinguishable from any comet humanity has ever observed. You would outguess at precisely the rates that match our expectations, and then, at the moment of closest approach to your target, when the geometry becomes critical, you would do what you came here to do. The opposition surge will tell us if 3I Atlas is what it appears to be. If the brightening matches predictions for dusty ice, the natural comet hypothesis strengthens. If the surge is absent, if the object doesn't brighten the way it should, we have a problem that suggests the dust surrounding 3I Atlas isn't reflecting sunlight naturally. That suggests engineered materials with specific optical properties. That suggests something is absorbing or controlling the light in ways that nature never intended. 2 days. That's all that separates us from answers, or from deeper mysteries. The countdown has begun. Let me take you back to July of last year, when 3I Atlas was first discovered by the asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system in Hawaii. When astronomers calculated its orbit and realized immediately that something was wrong. It wasn't just another comet from the Oort cloud, that vast sphere of icy bodies that surrounds our solar system. It wasn't from the Kuiper belt beyond Neptune. Its velocity was too high, its trajectory too steep. The orbital solution showed something that shouldn't exist: hyperbolic, unbound, interstellar. Only the third object in human history confirmed to have originated beyond our sun's gravitational domain. Only the third visitor from the vast darkness between stars that we've ever detected. But from the moment of discovery, 3I Atlas violated expectations. Its path through space aligned with the ecliptic plane, that imaginary disk where all our planets orbit, to within 5 degrees. Do you understand what that means? Space is 3-dimensional. An object arriving from interstellar space could approach from any angle in that vast sphere of possibilities. The probability of randomly aligning with our planetary plane is 0.2%, 1 in 500. Already, before we knew anything else about this visitor, the mathematics whispered that something was unusual. That coincidence had been stretched too thin. But the trajectory alignment was just the beginning. As astronomers refined their calculations, they discovered something even more disturbing. 3I Atlas didn't just align with our planetary plane. It timed its arrival with uncanny precision, 29 million kilometers from Mars. Close enough to observe that desert world in exquisite detail. Close enough to study its thin atmosphere, its polar ice caps, its ancient river valleys where water once flowed, 54 million kilometers from Venus. Near enough to analyze the hellish greenhouse that transformed Earth's sister world into an acid-soaked furnace, and then perihelion. The closest approach to our sun, occurring on January 13th of this year, just 3 days ago, the moment when 3I Atlas passed through the inner solar system at velocities exceeding 153,000 miles per hour, becoming one of the fastest objects ever recorded. That perihelion passage happened behind the sun from Earth's perspective. Hidden from our view, a gap in our surveillance when anything could have occurred without detection. The combined probability of this sequence, the Mars approach, the Venus proximity, the perfect timing of perihelion, has been calculated by multiple research teams. The numbers come back the same every time, 0.005%, 1 in 20,000. We are far beyond the realm of coincidence now. We're in territory so statistically improbable that invoking random chance feels intellectually dishonest. And yet mainstream astronomy insists there's nothing unusual here, that 3I Atlas is just an ancient chunk of ice and rock, ejected from some distant star system billions of years ago, that happened to wander into our neighborhood by pure accident, that happened to align with our planets, that happened to time its arrival for optimal observation of multiple worlds. That happened to pass behind the sun at the moment when we couldn't watch. Coincidence upon coincidence upon coincidence. But the trajectory alignments, troubling as they are, is pale compared to what we discovered when we actually looked at this thing. When we pointed our most powerful instruments at 3i Atlas and asked the simplest question any astronomer can pose, what is it made of? The answer chilled everyone who saw the data. Spectroscopy is one of the oldest tools in astronomy. You take the light from a distant object, split it into its component colors, and read the chemical fingerprints embedded in that rainbow. Every element, every molecule absorbs and emits light at specific wavelengths. The pattern tells you what you're looking at. For comets, the pattern is usually straightforward. Water ice dominates. Carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, some organic compounds. Maybe traces of metals from dust grains embedded in the ice. The ratios vary slightly from comet to comet, but they stay within expected ranges. 3i Atlas violated those ranges spectacularly. When researchers analyzed the gas streaming from this object, they found something unprecedented. The ratio of nickel to iron in the outgassing material was extraordinarily high. Not just slightly elevated, not just unusual, orders of magnitude larger than anything observed in thousands of known comets. In fact, the nickel to iron ratio resembles what you'd find in industrially produced nickel alloys. Let that sink in for a moment. This visitor from another star, this object that formed around a different sun under completely alien conditions, just happens to exhibit chemical signatures that match human metallurgy. Mainstream astronomy offers explanations. Perhaps 3i Atlas originated in a stellar environment radically different from our own. Perhaps its parent star had unusual composition, rich in nickel for reasons we don't understand. Perhaps the outgassing selectively releases nickel over iron due to some exotic temperature or pressure effect. Perhaps. Or perhaps we're looking at the chemical signature of something manufactured. Something that contains alloys and metals not because they condensed from a primordial cloud, but because they were deliberately assembled, forged, built. Dr. Loeb has been careful to note that unusual chemistry alone doesn't prove artificial origin, but combined with everything else, the trajectory coincidences, the timing, the geometric alignments, it adds another piece to a puzzle that becomes harder to ignore with each new observation. And then there's the anti-tail, the feature that has dominated headlines and puzzled experts since the first Hubble images in July. Every astronomer learns one of the most basic facts about comets in their first year of study. Comet tails always point away from the sun. Always. The solar wind and radiation pressure push gas and dust outward. The tail streams behind the comet like a banner in a hurricane. This is not a suggestion. This is physics. This is how the universe works. 3i Atlas breaks this rule. Since the earliest observations, it has displayed a prominent jet, extending toward the sun rather than away from it. 400,000 kilometers of material streaming sunward, when everything we know says it should be impossible. At first, researchers assumed it was an optical illusion, a geometric anti-tail caused by viewing angle, where material that actually lies behind the comet appears to project forward due to perspective. This happens occasionally with ordinary comets and is well understood, but detailed analysis ruled out geometry. The anti-tail is real. It persists across different viewing angles as Earth's position changes relative to the comet. When image processing techniques remove the symmetric glow around the nucleus, a triple jet structure emerges. One major beam aimed directly at the sun, two minor beams at equal angles from the main jet, all pointing in directions that violate basic physics. How can material flow toward the sun against the constant outward pressure of radiation and solar wind? The physics seems to forbid it. Yet there it is, visible in image after image, month after month. Natural explanations have been proposed. Perhaps the nucleus has an irregular shape with a protrusion pointing sunward, creating a localized jet that briefly moves toward the sun before radiation pressure reverses it. Perhaps the rotation axis alignment creates polar outgassing that appears sunward from our viewing angle. Perhaps complex gas dynamics in the inner coma create shock fronts and flow patterns that mimic impossible motion. Perhaps, but the tail doesn't behave like transient features seen in other comets. It's persistent, stable, highly collimated, like a beam rather than a diffuse cloud. It maintains its structure across months of observation, and then researchers noticed something else about that tail, something that made the technological hypothesis impossible to dismiss. The rotation axis of 3I Atlas points toward the Sun to within 7 degrees. Think about what that means. This interstellar visitor, tumbling through space for potentially billions of years, spinning in whatever arbitrary direction its formation and history determined, arrives in our solar system with its rotation axis aimed at our star. The probability of this occurring by random chance is roughly 2%. Combined with the ecliptic alignment, the combined probability drops below 1 in 25,000, and suddenly the tail makes sense. If a spacecraft wanted to maintain constant orientation toward the Sun, if it needed to keep solar panels powered or sensors aimed, it would spin with its axis pointing sunward. The jets we observe might not be random outgassing. They might be attitude control, propulsion, course correction. The mainstream response is predictable. Unusual spin axis orientation can result from torques during formation or from asymmetric outgassing over time. The Yarkovsky-O'Keefe-Radzievsky-Paddock effect, known to slowly reorient small asteroids, might apply to comets as well. Could, perhaps. The explanations exist. They're plausible. They require no exotic physics or artificial intervention, but they require a coincidence. They require us to believe that an interstellar object, by pure chance, arrived in our solar system spinning in precisely the orientation needed to make it look artificial. At what point does the accumulation of coincidences become more improbable than the alternative? March 16th. Mark that date, remember it. Because on that day, 3I Atlas will reach its closest approach to Jupiter, 53.6 million kilometers. That's the predicted distance. The margin of error is small, refined by months of careful tracking. We know where 3I Atlas will be. We know when it will arrive there. What we don't know is what that distance means. Jupiter is the gravitational leviathan of our solar system. With a mass 318 times greater than Earth, it dominates the outer reaches of our planetary neighborhood. Its influence extends far beyond its visible cloud tops, creating what astronomers call a Hill sphere, a region where Jupiter's gravity overpowers the Sun's pull. That Hill radius extends to approximately 3.5 million kilometers from Jupiter's center. Do you see it yet? Do you understand what's about to happen? 3I Atlas will arrive at Jupiter at a distance that matches the Hill radius to within 100,000 kilometers. In astronomical terms, that's nothing. That's threading a needle from across the solar system. This is the distance where strange things become possible, where trajectories can bend in unexpected ways, where objects entering this boundary sometimes don't leave. Jupiter's irregular moons prove this. The Ananke group, 60 known satellites orbiting in retrograde, backward against Jupiter's rotation, captured from interstellar space or the outer solar system billions of years ago. They were foreigners once, wanderers. Now they're permanent prisoners, circling the gas giant forever. Could 3I Atlas join them? Under normal circumstances, absolutely not. The velocity is too high. 3I Atlas will be moving at 66 kilometers per second relative to Jupiter at closest approach. The escape velocity from Jupiter at the Hill radius is only 2.2 kilometers per second. To become captured, 3I Atlas would need to shed more than 96% of its kinetic energy. Impossible through natural gravitational deflection alone. But what if the circumstances aren't normal? Dr. Loeb has calculated what would be required for capture to work. Any fragments ejected from 3I Atlas during the Jupiter encounter would need velocity kicks that cancel out the relative motion. 66 kilometers per second, far beyond what natural fragmentation can produce, far beyond what tidal forces can generate, but achievable for a spacecraft with propulsion capability. If 3I Atlas is technological, if it's been decelerating since entering our solar system through what appears to be cometary outgassing but functions as ion propulsion, then it might arrive at Jupiter moving slower than current models predict, slow enough for temporary capture, slow enough to deposit daughter objects into stable orbits. The mothership scenario. This is the hypothesis that has the internet buzzing and mainstream astronomers nervously checking their calculations. That 3i Atlas isn't a single object, but a carrier vehicle, a mothership containing smaller probes that could be released during its Jupiter passage. The ice coating its exterior serves as camouflage, making it appear identical to a natural comet. The jets we observe are either genuine outgassing from this shell or controlled emissions for navigation. The technological payload inside remains hidden until the moment of deployment. Why would an extraterrestrial civilization go to such lengths? Why the subterfuge? Why not simply announce yourself? The answer lies in what science fiction author Lou Sixon called the dark forest. The idea that the universe might be filled with civilizations hiding from each other, terrified to reveal themselves because contact might attract hostile attention. In such a universe, the safest way to explore is through stealth. Through objects disguised as natural phenomena, you study a star system in detail without triggering defensive responses. You establish observation platforms around major planets without revealing your existence. You watch primitive civilizations develop over centuries, gathering data about their technology, their culture, their potential threat level, and you do it from Jupiter. The logical choice. Position observers there, and you can monitor the entire outer solar system while remaining far from the potentially troublesome inhabitants of the third planet. The 3i Atlas trajectory supports this interpretation if you're inclined to see patterns. It passes Mars for reconnaissance of terrestrial geology. It swings behind the Sun at perihelion, the optimal moment for gravitational assist and the worst moment for Earth-based detection. It emerges heading directly toward Jupiter, arriving at the precise distance where capture becomes theoretically possible. And then there's the rendezvous, the detail that conspiracy theorists have seized upon with breathless excitement. On March 17th, one day after closest approach to Jupiter, 3i Atlas will pass within 30.46 million kilometers of Uperi, one of Jupiter's most distant and obscure moons, a tiny irregular satellite barely 2 kilometers across. Uperi belongs to the Ananke group, the family of captured moons. The foreigners. The symbolism is almost too perfect. An interstellar visitor passing between Jupiter and its captured moon, threading through the realm where other wanderers became permanent prisoners. If 3i Atlas were going to release daughter objects anywhere, this would be the location. Stable retrograde orbits exist here. Objects deposited in this region could remain for billions of years, watching, recording, waiting. This is speculation, of course. The most likely outcome remains a routine flyby. 3i Atlas will arc past Jupiter, experience modest gravitational deflection, and continue on its hyperbolic trajectory into interstellar space. Nothing dramatic, nothing revelatory. But the Juno spacecraft, currently orbiting Jupiter, will be watching. Its instruments can detect small objects in Jupiter's vicinity. Its magnetometer and particle detectors can sense disturbances in the Jovian environment. If anything unusual occurs, if 3i Atlas fragments, if smaller objects are ejected, if anything deviates from predicted behavior, we'll know. And if after March 16th astronomers discover a 96th Jupiter moon that wasn't there before, a moon that appeared precisely when 3i Atlas passed through, we'll have our answer. We'll know that we're not alone, that we're being watched, that something from beyond our solar system established a permanent presence in our cosmic neighborhood, that the mothership theory was never theory at all. Let me tell you about the discrepancy, the mathematical anomaly that suggests 3i Atlas might be doing something impossible. Tracking the orbit of an object moving through space requires constant refinement. As more observations accumulate, as more data points are added, the orbital solution becomes more precise. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory maintains these solutions for every known object in the solar system, updating them as new information arrives. For 3i Atlas, there have been 46 such updates since discovery, each one incorporating additional observations each one refining the predicted trajectory. But something strange happened between solution 44 and solution 46. A researcher named M. Popovich noticed a discrepancy, a time bias in the calculations that grew larger as the predictions extended into the future, 13 hours. That was the initial difference, not much in astronomical terms, but when Popovich extrapolated forward using quadratic accumulation, that 13-hour bias grew to approximately 13.5 days by late April. What does this mean? According to standard gravitational physics and known cometary outgassing effects, 3I Atlas should arrive at Jupiter in mid-March, but the discrepancy suggests it might arrive in late April instead, nearly 2 weeks late. This delay would only make sense if 3I Atlas is experiencing controlled deceleration, if something is slowing it down beyond what natural processes can explain, if the apparent outgassing we observe isn't random volatile release, but functions as propulsion. Ion propulsion. Ion drives work by accelerating charged particles through an electric field and ejecting them at very high velocities. The thrust is tiny compared to chemical rockets, but it's continuous. Over months of operation, an ion drive can accumulate significant velocity changes. If 3I Atlas has been running ion engines since entering our solar system, decelerating slowly but constantly, it would arrive at Jupiter moving slower than predicted. Slow enough, potentially, for gravitational capture. Slow enough to establish orbit around the gas giant rather than flying past. Popovich's analysis assumes this. It constructs a mathematical framework where 3I Atlas is an artificial object using what appears to be cometary outgassing as cover for ion propulsion. The framework is internally consistent. The numbers work, but it remains unproven. The hypothesis requires 3I Atlas to be technological, and we don't have definitive evidence for that. The discrepancy might have other explanations. Errors in the observational data, miscalculations in the orbital modeling, unknown outgassing behavior that happens to mimic propulsion. Perhaps. Or perhaps we're watching humanity's first encounter with functional interstellar technology, and the evidence has been hiding in plain sight, buried in orbital solution updates that most people never read. The opposition alignment in 2 days will provide critical data. If 3I Atlas brightness surge matches expectations for a dusty comet, the natural hypothesis strengthens. If it doesn't, if the object behaves anomalously during this optimal viewing geometry, the ion drive theory gains support. March will bring the definitive test. Either 3I Atlas arrives at Jupiter when standard physics predicts, or it arrives late. Either it flies past at predicted velocity, or it's moving slower than it should be. Either coincidence stacks upon coincidence one more time, or we finally admit that something extraordinary is happening. There's a prophecy, an old prediction from a blind Bulgarian woman who died nearly 30 years ago, but whose words continue to echo through conspiracy theory circles and mystic communities worldwide. Her name was Baba Vanga. Born in 1911, she lost her sight at age 12 during a violent storm and reportedly gained prophetic abilities shortly thereafter. She died in 1996, but devotees claim she left predictions about events far into the future. One of those predictions concerns November 2026. This year, according to accounts circulating online, Vanga predicted that humanity's first encounter with extraterrestrial life would occur no later than November 2026. The prediction allegedly includes a warning about a colossal alien spacecraft entering Earth's atmosphere. The specifics vary depending on the source. None of these predictions have reliable primary documentation from Vanga herself. They might be authentic. They might be fabricated. They might be vague statements later reinterpreted to match current events. But the timing is haunting. If 3I Atlas were to somehow loop back toward Earth after its Jupiter encounter, if it used that gas giant's gravity for a slingshot trajectory reversal, an arrival in late 2026 wouldn't be impossible. The mathematics is complex, the probability low, but the window exists. The connection to 3I Atlas is obvious and irresistible for those predisposed to believe. An object from outside our solar system exhibiting anomalous behavior, approaching Jupiter at precisely the gravitational boundary where capture becomes possible, potentially returning to Earth within the year of prophecy. Coincidence? Divine foresight. Pattern matching by believers desperate for meaning. I approach prophecy with appropriate skepticism. Science deals with testable predictions and empirical evidence, not mystical visions. The psychological mechanisms behind prophecy belief are well understood. We remember hits, forget misses, and interpret vague statements to match whatever actually occurs. But the existence of such predictions influences how people interpret current events. Millions worldwide are now watching 3i Atlas with a specific narrative framework in mind. They expect something significant. They're primed to see confirmation of prophecy in ambiguous data. This creates a feedback loop in public discourse. Mainstream astronomers publish routine observations. Conspiracy theorists reinterpret those observations through the lens of prophecy and alien visitation. Media amplifies the most sensational interpretations. More people become aware. The cycle continues. The danger isn't that people believe in prophecy. Belief is personal and generally harmless. The danger is that prophecy narratives crowd out genuine scientific understanding. When discussion of 3i Atlas becomes dominated by ancient predictions and invasion scenarios, the actual scientific significance gets lost, and 3i Atlas is genuinely significant regardless of prophecy. This visitor potentially originated from the thick disk of our galaxy, a stellar population that formed 7 to 10 billion years ago when the universe was still young. If correct, 3i Atlas might be the oldest sample of cosmic material humanity has ever directly observed, older than our solar system, older than Earth, a time capsule from an era when the Milky Way looked completely different. The chemical composition provides clues about planet formation around stars with different metallicity than our Sun. The active outgassing at large solar distances tells us about highly volatile ices that survive in the deep freeze of interstellar space. The trajectory and velocity constrain models of how objects are ejected from planetary systems. Every measurement we make, every spectrum we capture, every image we process adds to our understanding of how matter behaves and how planetary systems evolve. This knowledge has value independent of any extraterrestrial hypothesis. Science and mythology are parallel narratives. Both attempt to make sense of phenomena that exceed our everyday experience. Both respond to the human need for meaning and pattern in an incomprehensibly vast universe. 3i Atlas has triggered both responses. The scientific community sees an opportunity to study interstellar material up close. The mystical community sees fulfillment of ancient warnings about visitors from the sky. Perhaps both are responding to the same underlying truth. Perhaps the universe is indeed filled with other intelligences, and throughout human history, prophets and mystics have sensed this without understanding the scientific details. Their visions filtered through cultural frameworks, expressed in religious or supernatural terms, but pointing at something real. Or perhaps we're simply very good at seeing patterns where none exist, at constructing meaning from randomness, at believing what we want to believe rather than accepting the cold indifference of physical law. March will tell us which. The Jupiter encounter will either confirm that 3i Atlas is an ordinary interstellar comet following ordinary physics, or it will force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about our cosmic situation. Either coincidence will stack one final time, or the prophets, in their confused and metaphorical way, will have been proven right. Let me paint the picture of what's actually out there right now. What we know versus what we suspect versus what we fear. 3i Atlas is currently crossing the constellation Cancer, fading rapidly as it moves away from the sun's warming influence. At magnitude 16, it's invisible to all but the most powerful amateur telescopes. Professional observatories track it continuously, recording every fluctuation in brightness, every change in the dust coma, every variation in that impossible antique tail. The object is roughly 4 to 6 kilometers across, small by planetary standards, but massive by cometary standards. Its surface area could accommodate a small city if anyone wanted to stand on frozen ice and rock, moving at tens of thousands of miles per hour. The nucleus is thought to be highly irregular based on how the brightness varies over time. It might be elongated, tumbling end over end as it travels. Or it might have large-scale surface features, mountains and valleys of ice that create brightness variations as different faces point toward Earth. We don't know because we've never seen it directly. Every image shows only the glow of sublimating gas and reflecting dust. The nucleus itself remains hidden inside that luminous cloud, its true shape and nature concealed, which is exactly what you'd expect for either a natural comet or for something deliberately disguised as one. The composition, based on spectroscopy, includes water ice, carbon dioxide ice, carbon monoxide ice, and various organic compounds, all consistent with objects that formed in the frigid outer regions of a protoplanetary disk, all consistent with what you'd find in any comet from our own Oort cloud, except for that nickel to iron ratio, except for those chemical signatures that don't quite fit the pattern. The outgassing rate has been measured and modeled. 3I Atlas is actively sublimating, losing mass as solar heating turns surface ice directly into gas. The rate is higher than expected for an object at its distance from the Sun, suggesting the presence of very volatile materials like carbon monoxide that evaporate at low temperatures, or suggesting an internal heat source, or suggesting propulsion that masquerades as outgassing. The rotation period has been estimated from variations in the anti-tail structure, somewhere between 6 and 12 hours, though the exact value remains uncertain. This rotation sweeps the jets across different directions, creating the complex patterns we observe, or it maintains stable orientation for sensors and solar panels, while reaction wheels inside control precise pointing. Every observation admits two interpretations. Every measurement can be explained naturally or artificially. We're trapped in a state of epistemological uncertainty where the data fits multiple models equally well. This is frustrating for science. We want definitive answers. We want observations that conclusively distinguish between hypotheses. But nature, or whatever intelligence might be out there, isn't obligated to make things easy for us. So we accumulate more data. We refine our models. We watch and wait for the critical moment when coincidence either becomes certainty or collapses under its own improbability. That moment is coming. In weeks, not months. In days, not years. The opposition alignment starts in 2 days. March 16th arrives in 8 weeks. By the time spring fully settles over the northern hemisphere, by the time trees bloom and birds return from winter migration, we'll know. We'll know if 3I Atlas is just ice and rock, or if it's something more. We'll know if the anomalies were measurement errors and coincidence, or if they were the first evidence of technologies beyond our civilization. We'll know if we're alone in this vast cosmos, or if we've been watched all along. There's something else. Something researchers discovered only recently that adds yet another layer to this mystery: the Lagrange points. Do you know what those are? In orbital mechanics, there are 5 special locations around every 2-body system where gravitational forces balance perfectly. An object placed at one of these points can remain there with minimal energy expenditure, riding the gravitational equilibrium like a surfer on a wave. Jupiter has 5 such points relative to the Sun. L1 sits between Jupiter and the Sun. L2 sits beyond Jupiter on the far side from the Sun. L3, L4, and L5 occupy other positions, forming a complex gravitational landscape. The distance from Jupiter to these Lagrange points, approximately 53 million kilometers, the Hill radius. Exactly where 3I Atlas will pass. This isn't a loose approximation. The Lagrange points L1 and L2 are positioned at the Hill sphere boundary by definition. That's what makes them special. That's why objects can maintain stable orbits, despite the competing pull of Sun and planet. If you wanted to establish a permanent observation platform around Jupiter, if you wanted to position satellites where they could watch indefinitely without constant course correction, you would put them at the Lagrange points. And if you were an interstellar probe arriving at Jupiter, you would target the Hill radius boundary because that's where the Lagrange points are. That's where you could deploy daughter objects into stable positions with minimal velocity change. The precision required for this maneuver is extraordinary. You need to know Jupiter's mass exactly. You'd need to calculate the trajectory months or years in advance. You'd need to correct for perturbations from other planets, from solar radiation pressure, from every tiny force acting on your spacecraft. Natural objects don't do this. Comets wandering in from interstellar space don't arrive at precisely calculated orbital positions. They arrive wherever random chance and gravitational chaos deliver them, unless, of course, they're not random. Unless they're aimed. Dr. Loeb has published calculations showing what would be required. The velocity change needed to place an object at Jupiter's L1 or L2 Lagrange point from an incoming hyperbolic trajectory. The thrust requirements, the timing precision, the navigational accuracy, all achievable with current human technology, all well within the capabilities of any civilization capable of interstellar travel, and all completely unnecessary if 3I Atlas is just a dumb chunk of ice tumbling through space. So we watch, we calculate. We prepare instruments for the moment of truth, because if, on March 17th, anything appears at Jupiter's Lagrange points that wasn't there before, if telescopes detect new objects in positions where objects shouldn't naturally end up, we'll have proof, undeniable, irrefutable, extraordinary, proof that we're not alone, that we're being studied. That something with technology and intention established a presence in our solar system, that the universe isn't empty after all. Let me tell you what keeps certain scientists awake at night. The scenarios they discuss privately but rarely mention in public. The possibilities that sound like science fiction but are grounded in rigorous physics. Scenario 1, gravitational deflection only. 3I Atlas passes Jupiter, experiences modest trajectory bending from the gas giant's gravity, and continues outward on a slightly modified hyperbolic path. Nothing dramatic, nothing anomalous. The natural comet hypothesis confirmed. This is the expected outcome, the safe prediction, the one that 99% of professional astronomers will bet on without hesitation. Scenario 2, partial fragmentation. Thermal or tidal stresses cause 3I Atlas to break apart during the Jupiter encounter. Fragments scatter in various directions. Most continue outward into interstellar space. Some potentially enter elongated orbits that could return them to the inner solar system in future centuries. This outcome is plausible for a natural comet. Fragmentation happens. We've observed it before with other comets, including the previous interstellar visitor Borisov. It would provide valuable scientific data about internal structure and composition without requiring exotic explanations. Scenario 3, anomalous trajectory change. 3I Atlas exhibits velocity changes inconsistent with gravitational effects and known outgassing models. The object decelerates more than physics allows through natural processes, or it accelerates, or it changes direction in ways that require additional forces. This outcome would elevate the technological hypothesis from internet speculation to serious scientific consideration. It would trigger intensive follow-up observation campaigns. It would force the community to confront possibilities that most currently dismiss. Scenario 4, object release. During the Jupiter passage, smaller objects separate from 3I Atlas and enter bound orbits around the gas giant. If these objects require velocity changes exceeding what natural fragmentation can produce, if they appear at the Lagrange points or other strategic locations, this constitutes strong evidence for technological origin. The mothership scenario, the nightmare scenario, the scenario that would transform human civilization overnight. Because if scenario 4 occurs, everything changes. Our understanding of our place in the universe shatters. The assumption that we're effectively alone, that even if other intelligences exist, they're too far away to interact with us, collapses. We know that something came here, something with purpose and capability beyond our own, something that established infrastructure in our cosmic backyard, and we'd have to ask the hardest questions. Why are they watching? What do they want? Should we attempt communication? Should we remain silent? The dark forest hypothesis suggests that silence might be our only safety, that revealing ourselves to advanced civilizations could be catastrophic, that the universe might be filled with predators waiting for prey to announce themselves. But if 3I Atlas is artificial, If it has been observing us since July, then silence is already pointless. We've already been seen. We've already been catalogued and assessed. What happens next would depend on intentions we cannot know and capabilities we cannot match. I want to be clear, scenario 4 is unlikely. The physics required is extreme. The evidence supporting it is circumstantial at best. Every anomaly admits natural explanation if we're willing to accept sufficient coincidence. But unlikely isn't impossible. And the stakes of being wrong, the consequences of dismissing genuine evidence because it seems too extraordinary, are literally cosmic in scale. So we watch, not with certainty of what we'll find, but with an openness to whatever truth emerges. That's what science demands. Not faith in current models, not adherence to consensus, but willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even into territories that frighten us. March 16th approaches. The countdown continues. The observations accumulate. And somewhere out there, moving through the darkness at velocities that blur the line between possible and impossible, an object from another star carries its secrets toward the moment of revelation. Let me take you inside the actual decision-making happening right now at NASA and ESA headquarters. The discussions that determine how seriously we take this. There are meetings, committees, risk assessment boards that evaluate every unusual observation and decide whether it warrants special attention or can be safely filed under routine monitoring. For 3i Atlas, those committees are divided, quietly but significantly divided. The conservative majority argues that all observations remain consistent with natural comet origin, that the anomalies, while interesting, don't require invoking exotic explanations, that dedicating substantial resources to the Jupiter encounter would be wasteful when those resources could support other missions with clearer scientific returns. This position is scientifically defensible. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we don't yet have that evidence. Better to assume normal physics until forced to conclude otherwise. But there's a minority, a smaller group of researchers, including some at high levels, who argue that the probability calculations don't lie. That stacking coincidence upon coincidence reaches a point where the conservative position becomes untenable, that the potential significance of 3i Atlas being artificial vastly outweighs the cost of intensive observation. This group has been quietly advocating for coordinated monitoring during the Jupiter encounter, not just routine tracking, but dedicated observation campaigns using multiple instruments, radio telescope surveys to detect any artificial emissions, infrared monitoring to catch thermal anomalies, optical tracking at maximum resolution to observe fragmentation or object release. They want Juno tasked with active observation despite the spacecraft's primary mission constraints. They want the James Webb Space Telescope pointed at 3i Atlas during critical phases. They want ground-based observatories coordinated in a global network, providing continuous coverage. So far, these requests have been partially approved. Some additional observation time has been allocated. Some instruments will be watching, but not the full intensive campaign that the minority advocates, because committing those resources requires admitting that the technological hypothesis is plausible. It requires space agencies to publicly acknowledge that we might be looking at artificial intelligence, and that acknowledgement comes with consequences, political consequences. If government officials have to brief their leadership on the possibility of alien spacecraft in our solar system, entire bureaucracies mobilize, protocols activate, resources get diverted, the machinery of national security and international cooperation starts grinding, public consequences. The moment NASA or ESA officially states that 3i Atlas might be artificial, even as a low probability possibility, public reaction becomes unpredictable. Panic in some quarters, excitement in others, religious implications, philosophical upheaval. The entire conversation about humanity's place in the universe shifts, scientific consequences. If we take the technological hypothesis seriously and it turns out to be wrong, careers suffer. Funding decisions get questioned. The community's credibility with the public takes a hit. UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists gain ammunition. It becomes harder to maintain rigorous skepticism about future claims. So the conservative position prevails, not necessarily because the evidence supports it, but because the consequences of being wrong in the other direction are manageable, while the consequences of publicly elevating artificial intelligence hypothesis are severe. This is institutional inertia, the tendency of large organizations to avoid risk even when the potential rewards are enormous. It's frustrating for researchers who see the data and understand what it might mean. It's cautious from administrators who must balance scientific discovery against political and social stability. The result is a compromise. We'll watch 3i Atlas at Jupiter. We'll collect data. We'll analyze whatever happens. But we won't commit to the interpretation until forced to by overwhelming evidence. Maybe that's wise. Maybe that's cowardice. History will judge, but the researchers advocating for intensive observation have made their position clear. If something extraordinary happens at Jupiter, if scenario 3 or 4 unfolds, and we missed it because we didn't dedicate sufficient resources to watching, that failure will haunt astronomy for generations. We have one chance at this, one moment when 3i Atlas passes through the most gravitationally sensitive region of our solar system, one opportunity to observe with maximum intensity. After March, 3i Atlas continues outward. It fades from visibility. It becomes impossible to study with current technology. Whatever secrets it carries disappear into the darkness. We get one shot, and the institutional decision has been to take that shot with one hand tied behind our back, unless something changes in the next 8 weeks, unless the opposition alignment in 2 days reveals something so anomalous that even the conservatives can't dismiss it, unless public pressure or political intervention forces a change in approach. The scientific community is watching those meetings, those committees, those decision points where the future of human knowledge might be determined by bureaucratic caution. And we're hoping that when history looks back at this moment, when future generations ask what we did when an interstellar visitor arrived in our solar system, exhibiting unprecedented anomalies, we won't have to answer that we chose not to look carefully because it seemed too expensive or too risky to take the possibility seriously. March 16th approaches. The decisions are being made. The telescopes are being pointed or not pointed. The priorities are being set. And whatever happens at Jupiter will happen whether we're watching carefully or not. I need to tell you about the silence. The eerie lack of radio signals that either proves 3i Atlas is natural or proves it's more sophisticated than we imagined. Since the earliest observations, radio telescopes have been pointed at 3i Atlas, not officially as major campaigns, but opportunistically when telescope time becomes available. Researchers have scanned across frequencies looking for any artificial emissions, any narrowband signals that would indicate electronic communication, any modulation patterns that couldn't arise from natural processes, any radio brightness excess over what you'd expect from thermal emission and reflected sunlight. They've found nothing. Absolute silence across the electromagnetic spectrum, except for the natural thermal glow you'd expect from any cold object in space. For advocates of natural origin, this silence is expected and confirmatory. Comets don't emit radio waves beyond thermal background. The absence of signals means there's nothing artificial to detect. But for those considering technological possibilities, the silence is actually more troubling than noise would be, because it suggests sophistication. Any civilization capable of interstellar travel would know that radio emissions betray presence. They'd know that electromagnetic leakage from communications, power systems, and sensors would be detectable across interstellar distances. They'd know that staying hidden requires strict emissions control. A probe designed for stealth wouldn't broadcast. It would use tight beam communications impossible to detect unless you're directly in the beam path. It would employ passive sensors that gather information without revealing themselves. It would run on internal power that doesn't leak characteristic spectra. The silence doesn't rule out technology. It's consistent with technology specifically designed to avoid detection. This is the infuriating aspect of the entire 3i Atlas situation. Every observation, every measurement, every test can be interpreted 2 ways. Natural explanations exist for everything, but technological explanations exist too, and in some cases fit the data equally well or better. We're trapped in a state of ambiguity where coincidence and intention become indistinguishable, where chance and design produce identical observational signatures. The only way out is to wait for a discriminating observation, something that can only be explained one way, something that forces a choice between hypotheses instead of allowing both to coexist. The opposition alignment might provide that observation. If 3I Atlas brightness surge behaves anomalously, if the dust properties don't match natural materials, we have a discriminator. The Jupiter encounter definitely will. If objects appear where they shouldn't, if trajectory changes exceed natural limits, if anything occurs that cannot be explained by ice and rock and gravity, the ambiguity collapses. We get our answer, one way or another, and then the silence ends, either because we conclude 3I Atlas was natural all along and move on, or because we have to confront the reality that something artificial visited our solar system and we can no longer pretend we're alone. Either way, the conversation changes. The questions shift from could it be to what now, and humanity enters a new era. An era where the cosmos is no longer merely suspected to contain other minds, but confirmed to host them. Where the night sky transforms from backdrop to neighborhood, where every point of light becomes a potential origin for visitors we might someday meet or might already be meeting. The silence will end. Soon, very soon. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Something that emerged just last week from analysis of the latest Hubble images. Something that makes even the skeptics uncomfortable. The anti-tail structure has evolved, not randomly, not chaotically, but in a pattern that suggests response to changing solar conditions. When 3I Atlas was approaching perihelion, moving toward the Sun, the antique tail was prominent and stable, a clear beam of material streaming sunward with those characteristic triple jet features. After perihelion, as 3I Atlas began moving away from the Sun, the anti-tail should have diminished, should have dispersed. The geometry was less favorable. The solar heating was decreasing. Natural outgassing should have produced different structures, but the antic tail persisted, maintained its collimation, continued pointing at the Sun even as the comet receded. This is difficult to explain naturally. Outgassing responds to solar heating. As you move away from the Sun, the heating decreases, the sublimation slows, the jets weaken. You don't maintain constant jet structure across a wide range of solar distances unless the jets aren't driven by solar heating, unless they're driven by internal power, unless something aboard 3I Atlas is actively maintaining orientation and thrust regardless of external conditions. The researchers who noticed this evolution have been careful in their language. They note that the persistence is unusual and difficult to model with standard cometry physics. They don't say it's impossible. They don't claim it proves artificiality. But privately, in conversations not meant for publication, some admit that they're running out of natural explanations. That the accumulation of anomalies is reaching a critical threshold where invoking intelligence becomes simpler than constructing ever more elaborate scenarios to preserve the natural hypothesis. This is significant, not because any single observation proves artificial origin, but because the community's tolerance for coincidence is finite. At some point, Occam's razor flips. At some point, the simplest explanation isn't natural comet with unusually many unusual features, but artificial object designed to look natural. We might be approaching that point. We might be one or two more anomalies away from consensus shift. And if that shift happens before the Jupiter encounter, everything changes. The observations get prioritized. The resources get allocated. The world pays attention. Because at that point, we're not dealing with speculation about remote possibilities. We're dealing with probable first contact, with the most significant event in human history unfolding in real time across our telescopes and instruments. The antic tail continues to glow, pointing at our Sun, maintained by forces we don't fully understand, challenging our models, testing our assumptions. And in 2 days, when opposition alignment provides the clearest view we've ever had, We'll see whether that glow reveals a natural wonder or something else entirely, something that has been watching us all along. I want to bring you back to Earth for a moment, back to the human experience of all this, because while scientists debate orbital mechanics and chemical ratios, regular people are looking up at the night sky and asking simpler questions. Are we alone? That's what it comes down to. Beneath all the technical discussion, beneath the probability calculations and spectroscopic analysis, there's a fundamental human question that has existed since we first developed consciousness enough to wonder. Every culture in human history has asked this question. Every generation has looked at the stars and imagined what might exist beyond our world. Religion, mythology, philosophy, science, they're all different attempts to answer the same essential mystery. And now, in January of 2026, we find ourselves in a moment where that ancient question might actually get answered. Not through philosophical argument or theological revelation, but through direct observation, through measurement, through evidence. 3i Atlas represents possibility. It might be nothing more than ice and rock, an unremarkable comet from an unremarkable star. Remarkable only because we happen to detect its passage. If so, the question remains unanswered. The wait continues. But it might be more. It might be the evidence we've been seeking since we first wondered if anyone else was out there. The first confirmed contact with intelligence beyond Earth, the moment when humanity's isolation ends. That possibility is what makes this so compelling. Not just for scientists who study these things professionally, but for everyone who has ever looked up and wondered. Because if 3i Atlas is artificial, if March 16th reveals deployment of daughter probes, if we confirm that something technological established presence around Jupiter, then everything changes for every single person on Earth. Religious frameworks that assumed human uniqueness must adapt. Philosophical systems built on our cosmic isolation require revision. Political structures based on Earth-centric thinking expand their scope. Scientific paradigms incorporate new realities about intelligence and technology in the universe. The change would be gradual but profound. It wouldn't happen overnight. There wouldn't be Independence Day-style invasions or Star Trek-style diplomatic meetings. It would be more subtle, more distant. We'd know we're being observed, but the observers would remain remote, uncommunicative, inscrutable. And we'd have to live with that knowledge, with the awareness that we're not the only minds that have looked at stars and wondered. That somewhere out there, perhaps billions of years ago, another species developed intelligence and technology, that they're so far ahead of us that their capabilities seem magical, that they're here, or at least were here, establishing presence in our solar system while we were still learning to build fires and speak languages. How do you process that? How does a species that has always been alone integrate the knowledge of others? History provides some guidance. When isolated human cultures first encountered each other, when Europeans reached the Americas, or when Pacific islands were discovered, contact changed everything. Technology transferred. Diseases spread. Worldviews collided. The effects were profound and irreversible, but those were meetings between comparable civilizations. Humans meeting humans with only centuries of technological difference between them. What happens when the technological gap is thousands or millions of years? When the difference is so vast that we can't even understand what we're looking at? When the visitors don't want contact, don't need anything from us, see us as we see insects or bacteria, interesting perhaps, but not worthy of conversation? That might be the most likely outcome if 3i Atlas is artificial. Not dramatic contact, but cold observation. We'd know they're there. They'd know we know, and nothing would change except our awareness. We'd go on living our lives, fighting our wars, loving our families, building our cities, but the night sky would feel different. The cosmos would feel inhabited. Every star would carry the possibility of others looking back. For some, this would be comforting. Proof that the universe hosts life and mind in abundance. Evidence that consciousness isn't a cosmic accident, but a fundamental feature of reality. For others, it would be terrifying. the realization that we're vulnerable to forces beyond our control, that we exist at the mercy of intelligences that could end us without effort if they chose, that our insignificance isn't philosophical abstraction but demonstrated fact. Both reactions are valid. Both would coexist in human culture going forward, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We don't know yet. We're still in the possibility phase, the speculation phase, the waiting phase. 2 more days until opposition alignment, 8 weeks until Jupiter encounter, and then we'll know. We'll know if the universe is empty or populated, if consciousness is rare or common, if we're alone or watched. We'll know if 3i Atlas was our first contact or our latest false alarm. The answer is coming. Soon, very soon, and nothing will ever quite be the same again. Let me end with what we're actually going to see in the next few weeks. What observations are planned, what instruments are ready, what the scientific community expects versus what they fear. January 22nd opposition alignment. Earth-Sun 3i Atlas reaches optimal geometric configuration. Every major observatory with appropriate instruments will be pointed at this object. Hubble, James Webb, ground-based telescopes across the world. They'll measure the opposition surge, characterize dust properties, search for any thermal or spectroscopic anomalies that become visible under direct backlighting. If the surge is normal, if everything matches expectations for natural dust, the natural hypothesis gets stronger. If anomalies appear, if brightness or spectral features don't fit models, questions intensify. Late February through early March, final approach to Jupiter. 3i Atlas will be tracked continuously as it enters Jupiter's gravitational domain. Velocity measurements will be precise enough to detect any deceleration beyond what outgassing models predict. Position measurements will show if the trajectory is being actively corrected. This is where the ion propulsion hypothesis gets tested. If 3i Atlas is slowing down more than it should, if the orbital solution discrepancy proves real, we'll know by early March, March 16th Jupiter encounter. The moment of truth. 3i Atlas passes through the Hill radius at 53.6 million kilometers. Juno spacecraft will be watching with every instrument it has. Ground-based telescopes will maintain observation. Radio telescopes will listen for any emissions. If fragmentation occurs, we'll see it. If objects separate and enter bound orbits, we'll detect them. If trajectory changes exceed natural limits, we'll measure them. If nothing happens, if 3i Atlas simply curves past Jupiter and continues outward exactly as gravitational physics predicts, then coincidence wins. The anomalies were statistical noise. The patterns were imagined. And an interstellar comet passes through our system exactly as expected. March 17th, Uperi approach. The close pass by this distant moon. Not particularly significant unless something deposits itself there. Unless the captured moon family gains a new member. Late March through April post-encounter observation. This is where we'd detect any objects left behind. Jupiter's Lagrange points would be surveyed. The orbits of Jupiter's moons would be checked for perturbations indicating additional mass. Radio sweeps would listen for any emissions from deployed platforms. If the mothership hypothesis is correct, this is when we'd find the evidence. The daughter probes establishing position. The observers beginning their mission, May and beyond. 3i Atlas fades from view. It continues outward, crossing Saturn's orbit in July, Uranus by mid-2027, Neptune by mid-2028. Each month it becomes dimmer, harder to track, until eventually even our most powerful instruments lose it against the background stars. And then it's gone, back into the darkness between stars, carrying its secrets with it, unless it left something behind. Unless March 16th changed everything. The observations are planned. The instruments are ready. The scientific community waits with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Excitement because we're about to study an interstellar object in unprecedented detail during a critical gravitational encounter. Whatever we learn will advance our understanding of how comets behave, how they're ejected from their parent systems, how they survive billions of years in interstellar space. Apprehension because there's a non-zero probability that what we learn will be far stranger than anyone expects, that the anomalies will persist, that the coincidences will continue stacking, that we'll be forced to confront possibilities that sound like science fiction but are grounded in solid mathematics and observation. Either way, March 16th will be historic, either as the date we confirmed 3I Atlas was just an unusual comet, providing closure to months of speculation, or as the date we received definitive evidence of extraterrestrial technology, beginning a new chapter in human civilization. The countdown continues. The telescopes remain fixed on that point of light moving through Cancer. The researchers analyze each new image, each new spectrum, each new data point. And somewhere in the vast darkness between Jupiter and Saturn, moving at velocities that blur the distinction between possible and impossible, an object from another star carries its truth toward revelation. We'll know soon, days until opposition, weeks until encounter. The waiting is almost over, and when the answers come, when we finally understand what 3I Atlas truly is, the universe will be different. Not physically different, perhaps, but different in meaning, different in implication, different in the questions we ask and the possibilities we consider. The age of wondering might be ending. The age of knowing might be beginning. Or we might discover that the universe is far more mysterious than we imagined. That even when we think we've seen proof, certainty remains elusive. That the cosmos keeps its secrets even when we're looking directly at them. Either way, we're about to find out. 2 days until opposition. 8 weeks until Jupiter. The moment approaches. Are you ready for what comes next? Because ready or not, revelation is coming, and nothing will ever quite be the same. Watch the skies.